Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Haunted Dolls and Curses video. Alright, let's go ahead. Let's do an all new entry here. This one yet again based on one of your new suggestions. This one having to do with a fascinating case of a curse that you can actually visit and see to this very day. You know me, you know how much I love exact spots. I love the idea of going to an exact location and being able to see something or feel something associated with the subject of whatever video I'm talking about. Such is the case with a stain that is apparently tied to a legend of a curse associated with a man. This was a man who apparently sent a witch to her early grave, and before she did so, she remarked that she was going to curse him with a memorable item, something that would forever plague his name, and it turns out it's this that you're looking at right here. In fact, let's go ahead and let's talk about that now. There's some good information, but also some interesting info, some questionable stuff. I'll talk about that more here in a minute, but again, it has to do with this. It's the cursed memorial of Colonel Buck. So let's go ahead and let's share this info here. And those of you that are on the local level, I'd love to hear more of your thoughts and comments about this location. First, let's talk about the actual person itself. There was a real person that was associated with this curse. At least the person itself was real. His name was Jonathan Buck. I guess he went by a name called Bucksport. But either way, though, he was eventually someone who helped found the city called Bucksport, Maine. In fact, he founded it back at least in the 1700s. He was born originally in 1719. Somewhere during that time period before his death, he was a justice of the peace for that particular area. And not only did he help found that location, but he also created its first sawmill and then also set up its first general store. So he was someone that was almost a pretty prominent member associated with that town. It would mark Barron's that anytime he would have, let's say, an idea or authority or some other type of decision, people would listen to him and then make sure that they would implement that afterward. I mention that because it leads to this next part of the story. Now, I will mention this though. There's a lot of info here that raises red flags. When I was reading one article that was pointing out a lot of discrepancies, I kind of had to agree on this stuff. So take all of this with a grain of salt. I'll mention what those discrepancies are here in a minute. But it turns out that at somewhere along the way also, at least according to the legend, he came across a witch. Who knows why or how, but somewhere also later on, he ordered this witch to be put to death. And when that happened, he ordered her to death by burning. She ended up dying, obviously, because of this execution style barrens that was placed on her. But before she did so, the legend goes that she placed a curse on him. Now, there's various versions of this curse. In fact, there's various versions of this total legend in general. But the idea is that she pointed upwards to the sky and then stated a very long-winded sentence, at least in one particular version. And in another one, she stated something along the lines that your tomb shall bear the mark of a witch's foot for all eternity. And yet in another version, it wasn't her, but it was apparently the son that was done from her and him. In other words, the illegitimate son that had apparently been born and at that point had witnessed the death of his mother. And when that occurred, that's when he placed this curse and so on. And then in other versions, there's the idea that this was, since it was coming from a witch, this was almost like a demon-like child that was also associated with this legend, and that's why he placed the curse. And it just grows from there. In some versions of the curse, she did not have her foot burn off. In other versions, it did, and it rolled towards him. I'll mention that why here in just a moment, why that bears importance. And then in other versions, she was not even burned. She was actually drowned. So as you can see, there's so many interpretations of this legend, but unfortunately, no concrete proof, like nothing written or nothing else printed or anything else that could at least point towards the direction of hey, here's some validity associated with this legend. It just seems like it grew somewhere, and then from there it ended up spawning different other versions of itself. So interesting stuff, right? Like when it comes to this. The reason I mentioned about that witch's foot is because of this. About 75 years after Colonel Buck ended up dying, that's when there was a memorial that was placed. Now, this is also interesting to note. He has a memorial and he has an actual cemetery plot. In fact, you're looking at a picture of both of them here. The one that's associated with the memorial now has, after 75 years after his death, it has that specific looking stain. Obviously, that stands out, right? This is a stain that looks like what? Looks like a stocking. And if you take it even further, it looks more along the lines of a witch's stocking, like the classic witch, the kind that flies on a broom and so on. You know how they have those long, dark socks, if you could call them. That's what that looks like here. So when this stain started to appear, that's when it seems like this legend took on a life of its own, and it was tied to that fateful day that Colonel Buck had sentenced this woman to death, this witch, and that's when she had placed this curse on there. And according to further versions of the legend, somewhere along the way as well, there were not just one but several memorials done to him because the stain would not go away. No matter how many times the stain was cleaned or taken off, it would reappear, and when it was replaced with other memorials, that stain would pop up again. But also, there's still no real proof associated with that. It's, again, just more verbal, but that's at least some of the versions associated with those urban legends. And you can go there again to this very day, ever since that time period when that stain first appeared, which further gained prominence when there was another article. There was something that was posted like back in 1902 that caused this story. It was in a New England magazine to take on more of a life of its own. And apparently this town here, this Buckstown, has realized that, Bucksport has realized that, yes, this is a good thing because now people have shown interest in coming over from across the country, from all parts of it, maybe even from the world itself, to see this actual memorial in person, to see this telltale mark associated with that witch, whoever she was and however she did it, or if it was the son that did it. And you can take pictures of it. I believe, though, there's a fence surrounding the memorial itself. Somebody might have to correct me on this now, but if you're close enough, you may be even able to touch it. But still, you can go there to this day and actually take pictures of it. And that's, of course, something that is associated with this legend, and the town actively encourages it. But that's pretty much it. That's pretty much the info associated with the cursed memorial of Colonel Buck. I was mentioning, though, earlier about the two items, like there's the memorial and there's the grave site. The memorial has all those stains that have happened, and if you believe the further legends on multiple memorials, but the grave site that a lot of people don't know about is where he is actually buried. He's buried in that spot. It's a lot less prominent, right? A lot less prominent looking. It would just easily be overpassed. But yes, this is his actual spot, but there are no stains there, and it hasn't been stained ever. In fact, it's looked in an immaculate condition pretty much ever since it's been placed there. So again, another red flag associated with that legend, because if the witch was, I guess, prominent or intelligent enough to be able to do something like this, why not put it on the actual site itself, on the actual grave site, instead of the memorial itself? Plus, the other red flags are this: no witches were ever found to be put on trial in that area. And on top of that, when Colonel Buck was born and when he died was actually after anything involving the infamous like Salem witch trials. Like those occurred in the 1600s. Here in this case, he was born and died in the 1700s. So how would there be something like that associated with him in terms of, let's say, a witch, or being somebody associated with a witch, like having a child with her and so on, if there was nothing along those lines in that area during that specific time period. So again, lots of stuff associated here with a grain of salt, but as always, it's up for you to decide. But yeah, that's it. That's all the information tied to this cursed memorial. But if anybody has any more info, anything else I might have missed, then please post those comments below. I will admit, though, I'll be happy to go to this site one of these days if I'm ever nearby. Why not, right? It'll be a great place, just in case, if it is a true story, to be able to see an actual cursed item from a witch right then and there. Interesting stuff. So, all right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.